So please, I'd like to welcome to the stage Marc Giesener with Boston Consulting Group, Karl Haeusgen with the Machinery and Equipment Manufacturers Association of Germany, Enrico Della Gatta from Fincantieri, and of course, Leslie Hitchcock from Resilience Media. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started. So the US has just announced that it is stepping back from its role as European security guarantor. Otarian and Rheinmetall have just announced on our stage that they have a hardware-software partnership. And Haeusgen has just announced via press release that they are building a manufacturing site, or have a manufacturing site in southern Germany to provide 6,000 drones to Ukraine. The world looks a lot different than it did when we put together this panel, which makes this topic in our conversation all the more important. So sitting on our stage, we have Fincantieri, global leader in shipbuilding manufacturer, VDMA representing German manufacturers with machines and equipment, and BCG, who has just published their, fourth, all good, I got it, thank you, their fourth annual edition of the Defense Innovation Readiness Gap series. So let's talk about readiness. Given the current geopolitical climate, how confident are any of you that Western defense manufacturing is prepared for a major conflict? You got, your mics, sorry. There we go. Marc, why don't you lead off? It's on.
It's on. Yeah, I mean, analytically, if you look at the report and a very analytical survey of what is innovation readiness and what is the voice of customer across 59 MODs, you would say they're not ready. There is a 5% gap versus 2022. If you actually look at the outcomes and the self-reported outcomes, 50% of people report innovation is not enough. 12% of people say pace is sufficient. So that means well beyond the majority say pace is not efficient, not sufficient. And so the question is not, are they ready? I think the question is what to do about it. And many times when we start these conversations, the interesting thing is it's not just, when you say, like, what do you do about it? How do you ramp production? How do you think about affordable mass? A lot of the times the people stare back at us and say, well, we don't even know what we could ramp to. And so there's a fundamental baseline understanding that's really needed here.
Enrico.
I agree with Marc, but I would say that last years showed us that in somehow we understood again that production is deterrence. And we are testifying a kind of weaponization of mass production in terms of military systems. But we are not at the pace that we should be. I mean, we are trying to do something like this, but we have to reinforce the industrial base. And when we, it means we as Europe and we as the US, because it is a common issue between the two sides of the oceans. And even before, because our mutual industrial base are deeply connected. So we should speed up the production, but production is not only due to new systems. We do not need to produce only new codes, because without hard manufacturing, it will be difficult to face major conflicts or major rebalancing of powers globally.
Well, I think the straight answer is no. We are not prepared. The industry that I'm representing, machine and equipment builders, I give you a short picture. We have about 3,600 member companies in Germany. We represent the whole manufacturing business with the exception of cars, basically, and steel. 90% of these companies are family-owned, and 90% of these companies have 200 employees or less. So this is the classical German Mittelstand. That's number one. So decision-taking in these companies is kind of conservative. And also, let's say, the risk affinity is kind of limited. And what I see as a major problem at this point in time is the mindset, because we have been living in a comfort zone. Many of us, I mean, you in this room, you are used to the industry you work in. Me, no. For me, this is my first MSc, and we are just approaching the issue. And when I talk to my colleagues that own the companies out there somewhere close to Stuttgart or in Lippe, Westfalen, they're hesitating whether they should really support the defense sector. It starts with ESG financing, but it also starts with the mindset. And that's a major change that we have to make, and I think we're on the way, but it will take some effort. The other thing is ramping up. If you look at the manufacturing capacities, you will know that manufacturing capacities for almost all kind of defense technology is far too small in the EU right now. How fast can we accelerate this? And when it comes to manufacturing, as our companies that are in the game, you hardly manufacture any weapon system without the machines or the equipment that our members make. Can they ramp up fast enough? Are they willing to take the risk? I make a question mark.
So let's stay with you, Karl, for carrying on that line of thought. So a big inspiration for this event was the book Freedom's Forge, which went into how American industry helped win World War II through its production capacity. And so in 1939, America solved this by engaging across all of manufacturing. Is German industry ready to pivot? And what can startups, governments, industry, investors, policymakers do to support that?
How much time do I have? I try to focus. One of the key things is who is insuring the risk. If somebody's investing in new capacities now, and then 2 or 3 years from now, boom, all this demand goes down again. Who takes the risk? And I think if nation states are willing, the gentleman from Saab was mentioning that if nation states are willing to support the financing by giving a kind of a risk insurance to this kind of business, that would certainly help a lot. That would be one of the key issues, if I have to mention one.
So, Enrico, let's talk about Fincantieri. So there's AI-driven manufacturing, automation, advanced materials, and it's all revolutionizing defense production. Is Fincantieri investing in any of these types of technologies or partnering with companies who are doing this to speed up production?
The short answer is yes. And let me say you why. Because, being the largest Western, European and Western shipbuilders involved in naval shipbuilders, that means military shipbuilding, cruise ships, and SOV, that are the specialized operating vessels for oil and gas, offshore wind farms. We are spread around in 4 continents in 18 shipyards. So from Wisconsin region up to Vietnam, from Norway to Gulf region. But we have to understand that the most technically difficult thing to build is a ship. And we are building in Western countries, even if something like 90% of global market share went eastwards in China and Korea in the last 3 decades. But they are building easy ships. We used to call them, but don't quote me, shoeboxes. What we built in Europe, what we built in the US is the high technological payload. So if we are going to discuss about cruise ships, you have to imagine a floating city carrying 10,000 people, 5 hotels on board, with the production of power, the managing of water, of wastes, and then have to float. And I want to give you some numbers. If you want to compare the civilian production, every year we deliver 5 carriers, air carriers. And then we have to add the naval production. So we know perfectly how to bring on board innovations. And we are bringing on board innovation in terms of artificial intelligence. We are gathering data that are already on the ships. We are gathering data from the shipyards because we are transforming the shipyards that is kind of business belonged to 200 years ago in the future of the shipyards. We have a program to transform the shipyards in a digital shipyards, where the automatization of the program and processes are still forward. But even more, what is important is to transform the way we run the hard manufacturing. Because, I mean, that we like it or not, to build ships, you need blue collars aimed to weld tons and tons of iron. Otherwise, we will never have a floating ships. So we have also a kind of process to employ robots as welders. And
good idea.
I mean, you know, in the most powerful economy, United States, we have a labor force shortage of welders. And if you go through US industrial strategy, one of the main issues is not the nuclear power, is the shortage of labor force. Without blue collars, that we like it or not, we won't be ready to fight or won't be ready to counterbalance the emerging powers. It's a kind of fact. If you think that 98% of global trade travel through the oceans, if you try to imagine that 90% of global communication travel through underwater cables, if you try to imagine that more than 95% of the underwater domain is still unknown, it's easily to understand that up to date, in 2025, we know Mars' surface even better than we know our oceans. It's a kind of true. I used to say this sentence is as a joke, but it's not a joke. Apollo 13 cruise mission in early 70s was able to launch the famous emergency call, "Hey, Houston, we have a problem." 55 years ago, today we are not able to launch that kind of a problem from the depth of our oceans. So that is a kind of ecosystem that can host the innovation. And we're running, because I mean, innovation is power. And who lead innovation? Maybe is leading the economics and the economical development. But I will say something that is true. You are right. We are not ready. We as a Westerns are not ready. But we are not ready because we have to do something more, not because we are starting from the scratch. Because together with the tools, we have the know-how. So for us, it's a matter of speed up the production, not to try to understand how to do difficult military systems. We as Western countries, we as a NATO alliance, we as transatlantic alliance know perfectly how to do. And we are still the most important economies all around the world. And thanks God, our industrial bases are very well in producing. It's a matter of reshaping the production, try to integrate the future on the past systems. I mean, and here we are.
So Karl, you wanted to come in on something, and then Marc, I'd like for you to expand on the readiness based on what Enrico just shared after that.
Trying to make a very quick comment. You know, first of all, I would like to support the point with the shortage of labor force. I give you a quick example to show you the conflict that companies like mine, besides representing the industry, I run a company that builds hydraulic components and systems, which is a classical dual-use product. So our standard OEM would be a forklift truck manufacturer. You know, and maybe in year one he builds 10,000. Now there is a recession, he builds 7,500. Then business is running well, he builds 12,000. So this is kind of the corridor we're in. Now I was talking to a defense OEM just a week ago on a given system, and in 24 we supplied 25 of those. In 25 we would like to see 30 to 40. In 26 we would like to see 1,000. So we said, 1,000. And I think you can only do that through automation. if you try to build up the workforce to go from 25 systems to 1,000 systems within 12 months, whether you tried it in Italy or in Germany or wherever, you will not succeed. So we must be willing to take the risk to heavily automate the whole supply chain.
You know, it's interesting. Building on this automation trend, this interest in AI, the deep German industrial base, that's all great. But I think we're also missing one key element, and that is actually engagement with the customer. And so just to give you an example, in the report, 40% of people in the MODs related to acquisition do not engage with industry. And I'll just say it again because that's astounding. 40% of the people who are responsible for buying and sourcing capabilities and actually fielding assets do not engage with industry. So how are governments going to really understand the depth of the capabilities up here if they do not engage? And what do the companies need to do to actually engage and proactively reach out and shape opportunities and spend time with governments? Because that culture change is really hard.
So did you have any recommendations on how that could be done? Because that seems to be, that's why, you know, we have this type of stage and this type of platform, because the narrative isn't getting into the right places.
Isn't it called Boston Consulting Group?
It is. It is.
Too easy.
I'll say two things. I'll say one is frequently we've heard a set of things. It's a talent issue, it's a funding issue, it's an acquisition process issue, it's a risk aversion issue. And those are all real barriers. But in many ways, they're also excuses. There are many ways and avenues to overcome some of those things. There is funding. Funding is increasing. There are new acquisition pathways, at least in the US, OTAs, MTAs that are faster. You heard people up here earlier saying, well, when there was a war, Germany did this in a week. And so we could spend a lot of time talking about recommendations across those areas. Instead, I'd make one other recommendation, which is really thoughtful and targeted engagement. It is not that hard to pick up the phone and have a very thoughtful strategy, very thoughtful go-to-market strategy where you actually engage with the people buying the products. But it takes concerted effort.
I mean, there's an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that the business model of the defense industry is changing. And we are in the middle of this changement, this huge generational process. Because at least since the end of World War II, the defense industry have only two players, governments and companies. That kind of relationships give us the chance to understand that the innovation was mainly military innovation. So innovation was military driven. Up to today, it's not even more true. I mean, innovation is mainly commercial innovation brought in military domain. And what we are seeing is there are not only two players. We see a third party in the process. And that party is the private. That means private capitals, venture capital. They are, that we like it or not, are reshaping the process. Because the R&D activities were covered by the governments in the past. Today, R&D activities are run by private companies or are backed by private equity or venture capital, whatever it is. So we have to focus on this one, because it is true that companies and governments should be closer in exchanging views, because you are completely right, but we should take in consideration of the third parties, because the business model is changing, is moving from a cost-plus business model to a fixed price business model. And to work on the business in a fixed price business model, the companies has to be ready to be on time and budget. It means deliver on time and budget.
Karl, what did you want to add?
And there's another hurdle to overcome, which is not at all technical. It's purely processes. One of the gentlemen on stage, I think it was a gentleman from Estland, said procurement is not the problem. I clearly say procurement is the problem. And the two examples that you have mentioned, why did they work? Because it was red alert. And when it is red alert, the standard processes are just skipped. Certificates are not asked for. Boom, you go. For a given system, we have a customer that is a startup, maybe 2.5, 3 years old. He asked the same thing than one of the large OEMs. And he was delivering to the Ukraine. And he was bypassing all processes because it was red alert. So this customer is already delivering systems to Ukraine while the big OEM is still prototyping. So, and that's the difference. And we talked to this big OEM and said, we want to go to these certificates and processes as we are used to do it, because then we get a wider market and not just Ukraine. So I understand the point of view. But what I want to say is I believe there is hardly any other industry, maybe banking, that is such highly regulated as is defense. And that's something that all stakeholders in this business has to reflect upon. How can we take bureaucracy out? How can we find lean and fast processes? And that's for the suppliers really a nightmare. If you've never done defense and you have a super smart product, and then you go to one of these large OEMs, after 6 months you say, hey.
If I may, I think it's interesting you say that, and it's interesting to reflect on some of the panels earlier today where you had some startups pairing with some prime classic defense players, and you actually can think about really trying to tackle all the acquisition processes and using that hurdle as an excuse and whatnot. Or you can say, wait a minute, like what is people's and what are companies' real comparative advantage? And some thoughtful partnerships between traditional industry and novel startups is a really nice way to accelerate and overcome some of these hurdles. I'd say there's this concept we talk about a lot, it's 10, 20, 70. 10% is the innovation, the startups, 20% is the process, and what does that look like? And 70% is the culture change and actually getting people to change their behavior. And I would encourage us all to really focus on that, because there is a lot of process that exists that's painful, but there's also a lot of process that works. And so how do you operate in that change?
So in our last few minutes, let's look ahead at our long-term vision. In 2035, what does the ideal defense manufacturing ecosystem look like?
Well, I'd like to make the point we gotta stay with open markets in the Western world. And maybe there are some American colleagues in the room, and I don't know whether you are aware of the fact that no single American tank, no single American missile will be manufactured without German manufacturing equipment, not a single one. When it comes to a 5-axis CNC machine that makes high-precision steel, aluminum, or Titan parts, you don't get it in the US. You get it either in Germany, Switzerland, Italy, that's it. So I think that we continue partnership and do not start to bring down what has been built up over decades is a key issue.
Enrico, what do you think?
I would say an ecosystem that need to be reshaped in Europe, so otherwise we can compete. We have to create an industrial ecosystem able to have products in scope, scale. Otherwise, we will still be so fragmented that will be useless in the global arena. And an industrial ecosystem ready to be cross-fertilized from commercial technology and public requirements, government's requirements. How, it's not easy to say. Let me say that maybe it's easier to fix the outcome. And the outcome is that we should ramp up the production. We should do them cheaper, easier, and better. That's how we see the reshaping of the defense industrial base.
And Marc, what does the 14th annual edition of your report look like in 10 years?
Well, I'll say this. To answer your first question, I think it changes in 4 ways, or we'd like to see it change in 4 ways. 1, more players. There exist, but let's actually broaden them. They exist commercially. So more players, more production, more collaboration between industry and government across the value chain. And I would say very importantly, more affordability. new capabilities can be more affordable, and that's a fundamental change and shift in mindset. So those would be the 4 changes.
Thank you very much.